In this video, I'm going to walk you through the steps to come up with a good outline for your persuasive paper. For some of you, this will be a review, but I know that at least a few of you are feeling very concerned about writing a persuasive paper, so I figured I would walk you through the steps here. Before you panic, remember that you know how to try to convince someone of something, and that's really all you're doing in a persuasive paper. You're trying to convince your reader to agree with you about something. So some of you have even tried to persuade me not to assign this paper. And that way of thinking, giving reasons to support your argument about me not assigning the paper, that is essentially thinking along the lines of writing this kind of academic paper. I'm still going to assign it though, so let me walk you through how to deal with it. So the first thing you want to do is figure out what it is that you want to persuade your reader to believe. And we call that statement your thesis statement. There are two ways to think about a thesis. One way, if you're interested in formulas, is to say your topic plus treatment equals your thesis. The topic is what your paper is about. It could be about African American vernacular English. It could be about code switching. It could be about studying grammar. It could be about any of the things that we have covered in our class so far. Your treatment is what it is you want the reader to agree with you about the topic. So if I were writing about African American vernacular English, I might like to try to convince the reader that it is or is not a language, that it should or should not be taught in a college grammar class, etc. So the thesis is really just the thing you're talking about and the statement about the thing you're talking about. The other way to think of the thesis is that's the answer to a good, and by good I mean controversial, question. When I say controversial, I don't mean something that might lead to physical argument or some influencer's new video about why they don't believe in shaving their legs, I don't know, whatever. I don't mean controversial like that. When I say controversial, or when academics say controversial, what we really mean is just that a reasonable person could disagree. In other words, there are two or three sides that have different answers to that particular question. So, as I said, the topic is anything we've studied so far in this semester, and a way to come up with a thesis would be to think about a question related to your topic. I'm going to pick a topic that I'm going to say you may not write about, but I'm fairly certain you are not going to want to write about it. So there's my definition of controversial. Okay, so for example, let's say that I decide that I'm going to write my persuasive paper about the topic of subject-verb agreement. The next step would be to think of a question that is about subject-verb agreement where there are at least two different possible answers where people might disagree. So my question is, should we keep the S at the end of singular verbs? For example, she jumps, he jumps, it jumps, the bunny jumps, right? That S is like a remainder from a different way of speaking English. It's really from Old English. And at this point, it just makes no sense to have that S at the end of the verbs. So what if I say, okay, my thesis is we should get rid of the S at the end of singular verbs. That's a controversial statement because reasonable people could disagree with me about that statement. The next step would be to think of at least 3 reasons why your thesis is correct. My reasons are a little bit silly, but I'm assuming you're not going to write about subject-verb agreement, okay? So my reasons are, number 1, Geneva Smitherman notes that West African language don't use that S at the end of any verbs. West African languages don't tend to change the end of the verb depending on who's doing them. And since a lot of times we keep grammar rules because they reflect the values of either the people who came before us or the way of doing something in the generations before us, why not bring into the English language a trace of West African linguistic structure, in which case let's get rid of that S. Another reason could be that students have a really hard time learning this grammar rule, and I could use excerpts from my grammar book, I guess, to explain that. And the third one would be, it's logical that S serves no purpose. And I might talk about Old English versus Middle English in order to make that argument. So let me pause here and say a couple of things about the reasons. For this paper, you may only use evidence from texts that we have read, videos that we have watched, or any discussion. So for example, if you wanted to write about the Anglo or the Norman Conquest, if you wanted to use information that people posted in our discussion about the Norman Conquest, that would be fair game. But you may not go to the internet, you may not go to any outside sources, so there's no going to Google to look for something about singular verbs. You have to only use the texts that we've covered in class. So when you're thinking about your thesis, a question to ask is, can I prove this using evidence from the class itself? If you can't, throw out that thesis and come up with another one. So the next thing I want to talk about is just a very basic paper outline. The thesis statement should always be, or at least for now, it should be the last sentence of your introduction paragraph. So you are not writing your paper from the beginning to the end. You're a little bit writing maybe like the skeleton of your paper, and then you're going to add more to it. So the first thing you're going to have is your thesis statement, and that would go at the bottom of the introduction paragraph. The next thing I suggest that you write are the topic sentences for each of your body paragraphs. Each body paragraph will give a different reason why your thesis is correct, and you need to identify that reason in the first sentence, the topic sentence of your body paragraphs. I'm giving you a formula for the first sentence of your first body paragraph. You could write one reason why, and then I would insert my thesis. We should drop the S at the end of singular verbs is because, and then I would quickly say my reason. West African languages don't use that S, period. And then I would use the rest of that paragraph to explain what Geneva Smitherman said about those languages, and then loop back to my thesis and say, look, this is why my thesis is right. And you want between 2 and 4, maybe 5 body paragraphs, so each one would have a topic sentence. The conclusion paragraph, for now, you can start by restating or referring to your thesis. So you might say, in conclusion, comma, and then state your thesis again, and then you'll offer a concluding insight, and we can talk about that more later. Then you can start writing your body paragraphs because you know what your argument is, you know your reasons for your argument, and you know that you're going to restate your argument at the first sentence of the conclusion paragraph. Then we're going to think about how to write the rest of your intro and the rest of your conclusion. So if you're feeling nervous, I suggest that you start at the thesis, write your topic sentences, and then why don't you just email them to me and let me take a look and make sure that you're on the right track. I hope this is helpful. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me, and good luck starting to write your paper.